Back to another episode of Go Beyond Fundraising and Fundraising Today, where we explore trends, motivations, and strategies that drive nonprofit marketing and charitable giving. Today, we are looking at a fascinating topic that is shaping the future of fundraising, which is generational giving. This is always a really popular topic. And we're specifically going to be breaking down some of the unique characteristics of Gen X, as well as making a few guesses about the up and coming Gen Alpha and looking at how their philanthropic behaviors and preferences will transform the landscape for nonprofits as they come of age in the next decade or so. Joining us to discuss this topic today is Alyssa Boger, our EVP of Client Strategy. Alyssa, welcome.
Thank you, Leah. Excited to be able to talk to you today about Gen X and Gen Alpha. We've had a lot of conversations in the last year about Gen Z, and we're able to work with Classy on some research there. But I think sometimes Gen X is the forgotten generation a little bit. So excited to be able to talk through what we're seeing that generation and what's to come on the horizon with Gen Alpha.
Absolutely. So Gen X is such an interesting generation because when we think about people that are in their prime earning years right now, it's Gen X. And I think they're such a fascinating generation. Like the millennials, that came of age in this rapid transformation of technology. And so I'll be interested to get your thoughts on what we're seeing and what we expect to see down the road as this generation starts to retire in the next decade or so. Who are Gen X? What do they look like as donors?
Yeah. So Gen X typically are those born between 1965 to 1980. There's not official generational markers, but I would say that's what's traditionally accepted. So that makes them around 44 to 59 years old this year. They're about 20% of the US population, and they represent around 22% of giving in the United States. So a significant portion of our available donor base and those that we want to be talking to from a fundraising standpoint, they actually lead all generations in the number of volunteer hours served. They average about 8 volunteer hours per month. And so very much embedded in, I would say, the state or mindset of philanthropy. It may just not always be giving of dollars. It might be giving of time or giving of their passion if it's advocacy or volunteerism. So I think that's just an interesting thing to consider is they're very connected to the organizations that they do want to serve and be part of and feel deeply connected to their communities. So that's something that I think we're seeing in the types of organizations that they want to serve is those that are within their community. That might be education organizations, places of worship, as well as causes or missions like environmental issues, international development, children's welfare. I think if you take a step back and think about where they're at in life, probably having families, children of all different ages. You have some within this generation who still have elementary school kids because they started later in life, and others who are on that empty nester track. They all are considering the world in which their children are growing up in and what they're stepping into. And so I think being driven toward causes that will support their family unit and the success of their children as they continue to grow up. They also are a bit more focused in the number of organizations that they support. Boomers tend to support a few more organizations. Even millennials tend to support a few more. Gen X, I think, is starting to zero in on the causes that are most meaningful to them. They've probably had to be more mindful about their spending and their giving because they have been raising kids, and I know from personal experience that's not inexpensive. And so through that time of raising and building a family, you start to probably prune a little bit the types of organizations and number of organizations that you serve. So they are a little bit more fickle or loyal to a smaller number of organizations than other generations.
That's interesting that you shared that they tend to support fewer organizations that they're more loyal to, because when I think about some of the most transformational events, especially in the US in the last 20 years, Gen X has weathered a lot of financially with different recessions, a lot of volatility with, I'm sure, things that are happening in their retirement fund. They're thinking about what they want their post-retirement years to look like. So any other thoughts along that before we move on to some questions around like motivation?
I think they're in this interesting spot of they're, like you mentioned earlier, more at the peak of their career, feeling a little bit more settled. Although, to your point, there have been quite a few financial just storms that they have weathered. And so not feeling quite as confident in their portfolio in the past as in the past. But I do think they're a little bit more focused on how they can have the most immediate impact. So knowing that there's volatility, they're not yet on the cusp of finalizing their estate plans and transferring their wealth and thinking about inheritance. And so a little bit more focused on how can I make an impact here and now? How can I make things better for my community or for my children? I think as nonprofits, knowing that they're more inclined to volunteer and want to be involved in the charities that they support, how are you reaching out to donors in the Gen X framework that you're inviting them to be a board member or part of more of those leadership type of opportunities within an organization that furthers that connection and relationship that they have with you. I think they're in that period of life where they've accumulated some wisdom and some knowledge, and being able to share that in some way, activate passions that they might have outside of their work and their home life can be really meaningful for this generation and just the point at life that they are today.
There's a lot of interesting facets to Gen X that I don't know if nonprofits are fully like paying attention to in some of their outreach and engagement strategies, because like you said, they don't necessarily look like the previous generation boomers and how they like to give in the number of organizations they support and even the way they like to be involved with them.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think there's a lot of opportunity for those volunteer roles that might look different than in the past. It's not just volunteers for events or a board, but it is someone who wants to do some consulting or has a unique skill set that could be leveraged in support of a cause that they just care so deeply about. And so not being afraid to explore those types of connections. Sometimes you need to keep, if you open the door too wide, being able to control message or strategy and have donors influencing some decisions can be tricky. But I think looking for those opportunities to engage Gen X in a different way will just set you up further for success as we also think about the great wealth transfer that they're about to be part of. And so that's something I think in particular that's just another unforeseen and something that we haven't experienced in the nonprofit space to this magnitude. When you look at giving or inheritance through 2040, Gen X is estimated to inherit $30 trillion and millennials about 7 trillion. So just those two generations combined, there's going to be a huge just surge of giving potential and capacity within those generations. Gen X sooner, a little bit sooner than the millennials. But I think it's an interesting also just strategy to be thinking about. Gen X is less reliant on traditional investments. They're moving into alternative investments like private equity. The majority of investors, I think since 2018, the number of investors who have sustainable and an impact investments in their portfolios has doubled. So organizations being able to show donor impact, being able to create family donor relationships, I think will be important. So from a major gift perspective, you have some key donors who are boomers. How are you developing relationships with their children, not just that donor, so that the giving almost passes down from parent to child at some point and doesn't just completely disappear. So there's a lot of just interesting nuance and I think opportunity to rethink some of the ways that we've always engaged with donors, in particular for Gen X.
Yeah. And you bring a great point that within the next few years, a lot of, and even now, a lot of Gen Xers are having to care for elderly parents. And so there are probably a lot of them who are already heavily involved with their parents' finances and are seeing the mail that's coming in. They're seeing the estate and how it's been set up. And I think having a mindset to who the caretakers are of those people in that estate is going to be really crucial, because the last thing any nonprofit would want to do is to mishandle that really tender and delicate part of that handoff of that legacy gift or things like that with Gen X children who are used to a much more personalized relationship with organizations that they're already supporting, or even with brands that are interacting with them in incredibly personal ways.
Yeah, I totally agree. I'm not sure if trying to share the story on a past podcast or CEO, but there's two organizations that shall remain nameless that his father had donated to in his estate. And the way that those organizations then followed up mom through that process was night and day. One sent more of just a form letter from a legal department thanking them for this pretty sizable gift. The other showed up, wanted to get to know his dad's wife, has invited Trent and his brother to events so that they're getting to know the family. And that organization is likely to receive yet another estate gift when his mom passes away, possibly ongoing giving from Trent and his brother, versus the other organization that is nowhere in their ether, has left more of a sour taste in their mouth because of the lack of engagement and stewardship. And so just thinking about the way we as an industry sometimes lean toward more of that transactional approach because it's easier, that's the way it's always been done, or we have a process and a system for it, versus taking the time to really build connection and relationship. It's a long game, but it is what really, I think, sets us apart as an industry, is the people and the connections that we're building. And I think that will be really important for Gen X in particular. It's just the care that organizations provide as they do start to receive these estate gifts, or as they start to build more family-based donor relationships, just the longevity that can come with that, because organizations have taken the time and intention to think about donors in that way.
Moving on to some of the channel preferences, mail, digital, SMS. What are some key characteristics of Gen X donors and volunteers in their relationships with some of the most popular ways to market your nonprofit, to raise funds for your nonprofit?
Yeah. I would say, unlike some of the preceding generations, Gen X is very comfortable giving online and offline. So I would say continuing to build and support a true omni-channel strategy is really critical. Gen Z, Gen X, really all generational donors are getting bombarded with emails, advertisements, direct mail campaigns, phone, text. So you do need that combination of touch points with the right message at the right time to be able to break through in certain areas. I think there's just inherent brand building and recognition and familiarity that comes with that multi-channel approach that then allows the donor to make the decision of how they then want to make a gift and activate. So it might be the direct mail appeal that they receive, or it might be scanning that QR code and going to make a gift online. But that direct mail piece helped to break through their cluttered email inbox and show them something that caused them to want to take action. I think it will be, as much as we'd love a silver bullet and one specific channel to focus in, a really more of that surround sound approach of being able to leverage all of the different channels at certain points of time to be able to speak with and activate donors in the way that's going to resonate most. I did read an interesting article that was saying that Gen X, more so than any other generation, is likely to be put off by bad testimonials, negative reviews, and outdated websites. They're definitely much more, I think, focused on impact, transparency, and the effectiveness of a nonprofit. And if it seems like a nonprofit isn't serving their constituents, isn't stewarding their gifts, or just has an outdated website, which insinuates that they're not up with the times, they don't have the internal strategies to be able to deliver on their mission as well as another organization that has a more updated website, that those types of things can influence their giving. So it is important to think about the impression that the organization is cultivating publicly and the story that you're telling through donor impact stories, your presence on the web, on social media, being able to clearly articulate your story and present it in a way that feels professional, but also authentic.
So let's move on to Gen Alpha.
Mhm.
What do we know about Gen Alpha at this point? There's not a lot of studies I know on them. They're still mostly minors under 18.
Yes.
But there's a lot still happening in social media that is giving us some indications as to where this generation may be headed.
Yeah. So they are born between the years of 2010 and 2025. So yet to be born, half of whom have Gen X parents. So they're a little bit of a combination of Gen X and millennials. I would say for this generation in particular, the pandemic really just accelerated their adoption of technology. So it really became embedded in every part of their life. Remote learning, you're at home, your parents are probably working from home. And so TV and screen time became a bit of a babysitter to just get through what was the crazy onset of the pandemic. And so they're not digital natives. I saw in an article they call them digital ninja. And so it's just this next level of digital immersion, I guess you would say, from anything from YouTube to gaming to social media. It's just a completely different world that these kids are growing up in, which is then translating into the causes that they care about. One study I read showed that of about half of 12 to 15-year-olds want to protect people from bullying and for everyone to be treated the same. So they're in this environment, especially social media. There's this innate, I think, desire for Gen Alpha to be like famous because they just see all these influencers around them. Yet they also know that this isn't healthy for them. And they see their friends or themselves being bullied, that their mental health isn't where it should be. There's more and more studies coming out about just the impact of social media. I think the Surgeon General saying there should be a warning that it's not safe for minors. And so there's this tension of this is where all of my friends are engaging. This is where I get my information. This is where I feel value and worth. But also I need to be in like the real world and spend time with my friends and don't want to feel this way about myself. And so they're starting to align more to those causes that are giving them a voice. So anti-bullying and equity and mental health, those types of causes that they can really already resonate with, which is just honestly really sad. As a parent of young kids, it's crazy.
I think the awareness that nonprofit organizations need to have around just how technology continually changes, the places where people want to spend time online, I think are always going to continue to evolve. There's always going to be something on the rise and something on the decline, and has a built-in strategy of anytime some new technology, social media, some new platform comes online, what are our set procedures for evaluating this piece of technology? How do we make sure that we lock down our handles? How do we make sure that we keep our branding consistent no matter what the channel is? And so that's one aspect that if I were sitting at a nonprofit, I would be thinking about how do I responsibly respond to the changes that are happening, especially on the internet.
Yeah, I agree. And I think too, a little bit more this generation, obviously you can't communicate directly with minors. We want to have them all in our email systems and start sending them fundraising messages. So leveraging platforms like Twitch, where you're able to create this and cultivate an audience within the gaming community, especially as younger individuals start to increase their engagement with video games. It's an escape for a lot of them. Being able to, it's not necessarily a long-term donor relationship play because you're not getting all of those individual donors and continuing to reach out to them, but you are in essence starting to plant those seeds of a culture of philanthropy and how someone might be able to support a cause because that gamer or an influencer through a peer-to-peer campaign is talking about how passionate they are about your mission and why they are wanting to support it and why they're asking for all of their friends and followers to support it. So being able to also think about strategies in that way, it's definitely more of that, again, long-term play for creating connection with future donors who can be more one-to-one, but for now can be part of a larger group or collective that feels like they're supporting your mission through someone else.
I also wonder if nonprofits should be thinking about how saturated Gen Alpha is in the whole world of influencers, because I've seen like kids on TikTok who are doing the get ready with me videos and they're 12 and they probably shouldn't have a TikTok, but they've got like 1 million followers because they're just got a great, bubbly, engaging personality. And to your point, there's a lot of them who want to grow up and be like YouTubers. And that's just this like online content creator is just a career that seems as natural to a lot of them as breathe. I wonder for nonprofits, like how can they harness in the future that they're all marketers, like they're all just born marketers. They're all gonna be born communicators and content creators. So how can they really leverage those just native skills that these young people have in the future to make them as voices for their brand?
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Leah. It will be interesting just to see what unfolds with this generation. I would hope that a number of them have their parents who are helping to shepherd this content creation, or if they're developing partnerships with other brands, because that's happening with just the sheer buying power and influence this generation can have, being able to connect those relationships with their parents and with that child. As we think about Gen X being so entrenched in volunteering and having direct impact in hand in an organization's mission, what are those opportunities to invite the parent and the child to volunteer together or to do some type of like content collaboration? So I think there's some interesting just opportunities. They'll have some great marketers, like you said, who might be able to come in at some point and help to elevate the organic content that an organization is creating and putting out there. So it'll be interesting to see how that partnership unfolds as they continue to grow up and get older.
Another facet I think about with Gen Alpha is because it is just so difficult to curate content online and to do fact checking and make sure that all this information that's pouring into their young brains is accurate and isn't so influenced by biases. I can see especially more education driven nonprofits or more advocacy driven nonprofits thinking about how they can be responsible with the information that they're putting out there. And I don't know, I don't have exactly an organized thought about that, but sometimes the things that keep me up at night is this next generation going to be able to tell the truth from fiction sometimes.
I know. I'm even struggling with that, Leah. I'm not cool enough to be on TikTok, even though I am a millennial. And there was a video of this woman making this dish that I feel like had to be a parody, but you don't know if it's really fake because it does seem so real. And then you go to the comments and it's like half and half. Some people are, oh my gosh, who would eat this? This is crazy. This is ridiculous. Thinking it's really her because she, I guess, does do recipes. And then other people, they're like, this has to be fake. This can't be real. This has to be just for the engagement and the likes. Another video I saw where I was like, oh my gosh, is she really making that for her husband? And then I go to her page and she's just like a digital creator. So again, just creating stuff for the likes and the comments, the engagement and the monetization of that. You have AI. It's really hard. More and more reels being created that are people's faces, but it's AI generated content that they're speaking. And you really have to take a beat to either read the caption or to see that this isn't matching up. It's just, it's interesting what we're going to be facing, which I think is even more reason why nonprofits have to be even more grounded in that like transparency and authenticity and honesty about their impact and what they're doing with donor dollars, because trust is going to be at such a premium. As I feel like we just continue, it's going to be harder and harder to trust those unknown voices.
Absolutely. As we wrap up today, is there anything else we should be thinking about? Any other interesting facts that you found as you were researching for this episode? To be thinking about these two generations who are one generation apart, their parents and then their children of Gen X and Gen Alpha?
I would say I'm just excited to see how fundraising strategy continues to unfold as we seek to engage these different audiences. I'm interested to, I think, as we're at an interesting inflection point, similar to what I was sharing earlier of think for Gen Alpha, even for Gen X, is there is a number of their parents been immersed in this digital world, but in many ways are just longing to break that grip of social media and experience the world and be with people. And so it'll be interesting to see if we continue to see more of an emphasis on things like volunteering, if engagement in actual face-to-face in-person events starts to see more of an upswing, especially like Gen Z in particular. They want seek experiences. So how are we as an industry rethinking the event space and creating those opportunities for more personal connection? It doesn't have to be a huge run, walk, ride or a super expensive gala, because that's not what these generations are looking for. But what is really an impactful experience look like for these generations, that especially Gen X and Alpha, that they can create those memories as a parent and child of being able to experience the impact of their giving, whether it's through volunteering or advocacy or actually making a gift. That's how we start to pass down that culture of philanthropy and create a more sustainable culture and just environment of giving well beyond the current generations that we're relying on for support today.
That is such a great point. When I think about what we shared about Gen X and how they want to roll up their sleeves and lend some of their own wisdom in the process, or how I think younger folks see this world where they can just, I think, customize anything. These rigid ways of interacting probably seem a little bit old-fashioned to them. I would wonder how nonprofits can be thinking about ways that they can invite their donors and volunteers and constituents to come up with their own ways of volunteering or helping and be more creative in that process. Because I think at the end of the day, generations today want to feel like they're contributing more than just showing up, like they're actually contributing something of their own insight, their own wisdom, their own creativity in the process.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think thinking about those do it yourself events, whether it's a fundraising opportunity or it's a volunteering opportunity. If you're a food bank, how are you supporting that Generation Alpha to do a mini food drive with their friends, knowing it will engage their parents as Gen X to be able to help supply those things, but it's putting more of the power in the youth's hands of feeling like they're making an impact, making a difference. They're coming together with their friends or their community and starting to like sow those seeds of philanthropy. I think it's also really easy, especially with the pandemic, to just live in our bubble and not get out to experience what might be truly impacting our communities or the cities in which we live, or just the injustices that other groups might be facing. And so also thinking as an organization, what are those learning experiences, teaching opportunities? I remember when I was in college, I worked in our volunteer center, and I went to college in Los Angeles, and our very first event, or I guess team bonding experience, if you will, as part of that volunteer center, is that we had to all get on. We were broken up into groups, and we had basically a route that we had to take through Los Angeles on public city buses. And you had to stop at certain places. You had to navigate the bus schedule. And I went to a university that was outside of LA. And so just getting to LA was a trek, but it opened your eyes to just the way that the majority of the LA population travels and has to rely on getting around. And it's started making you consider so many things about your daily experience, how you could make an impact, whether it was environmentally or supporting just all different types of missions and causes. And I wouldn't have had that perspective if I didn't have that out of the box experience. Even just thinking about how you as an organization can bring your mission to life through some unexpected types of experiences like that allows Gen X, Alpha, the parent-child relationship to see a new aspect of their community or their city for the first time and build those experiences together, I think is really meaningful.
So many great things you've given us to think about today, Alyssa. And like you, I'm excited to see some of the studies that come out about these generations and how they interact with philanthropy in the coming years. But thank you so much for your time today
Thank
and
you.
for making time for this discussion.
Of course.